Sam was sitting on the mat, stretching his right leg as was the rest of the class. Jahadeen was at the front, stretching. "Now hold, till the count of 20. Jahadeen pushed into the stretch. A Kratik in the back groaned at the exertion. "Don't push so far you're in pain, just enough to feel the stretch. We want to loosen our tendons and muscles, train them to be longer." Jahadeen got up. "Everyone hold a bit more." He walked to the back of the class and knelt beside the Kratik. "You okay?" The Kratik looked up at him. "I've hurt worse." "I'm serious. I do not know your species that well yet. If you have limits, I need to know them. I don't want you getting hurt." The Kratik shook a bit, its jowls shaking. "I am fine, human. Nothing a drink won't cure. Forgive my groan. Get back to teaching." Jahadeen nodded and walked back to the front of the class. "Okay, everyone relax." The class groaned as they released their poses. Jahadeen walked through the group. "I want you all to pair up in sparring partners. I have preset kantas that I will feed to your spectacles. You will practice them until they stick in your muscle memory. Do you understand?" The class responded as one. "Yes, Jahadeen." Jahadeen paired up with the grazer student Elefante. The two bowed to one another. The class paired off and each set did their bows. Then on the count of 3, all started their practice moves. Jahadeen and Elefante were going off script. They had fought together so many times they knew each other's habits, Jahadeen having taught Elefante his. Now they were developing counter techniques to counter each other's counters. They began. Jahadeen struck. Elefante blocked with a wrist and then crossed over to attempt to grapple. Jahadeen spun with a pull, flipping Elefante over his back. The grazer landed on 3 of his 4 feet and used the last to continue into a flip. Jahadeen dodged back as 2 of Elefante's legs kicked out from the inner core of his body. Elefante landed on his side and rolled, dodging Jahadeen's stomp. Jahadeen did a run and double kick while Elefante tried to get up. Elefante rolled around on his back and thorax, spinning his legs into his teacher's legs. Jahadeen got tangled and fell into Elefante's limbs. The grazer latched onto him in a grapple. Jahadeen struck the soft points in Elefante's chest with his elbow. Elefante coughed, momentarily weakened. With a forceful thrust, Jahadeen rolled out from the embrace and onto the mat. He waited as Elefante caught his breath and stood back up. "You okay, brother?" Elefante nodded his head, focusing his eyes on Jahadeen. Again. Jahadeen smiled and started at him again. Outside the dojo, across the large plaza hall, in the newly opened Italian restaurant sat 2 goadur. Their mouth armor was lifted up to allow them to eat, gently placing noodles on their sharp triangular teeth. Their eyes were not on their meal, however. The 2 armored members of the great arm species were watching the fighters through the dojo window. The taller of the 2 goadur, clad in white silverish alloy armor, spoke to the other in black armor. "What are your thoughts on that?" The one in black armor thought for a moment, watching the students train. "Ritualistic self-induced damage to one's body to induce future favorable combat experiences. It is quite similar to our armoring processes. Interesting humans have developed such techniques." The silver one focused its bionic eyes on the grazer. "That teacher is actively creating as we speak with that grazer. It is not just ritual, but a martial science. Look at the Kratik." The one armored in black looked. The Kratik was sparring with the human president. The Kratik's moves were not the normal Kratik fighting style, but honed. Its punches were normal, but the methodology was thought out, styled, reducing wasted movement. Curious. It is punching with its whole body rather than their normal use of just the arm. If that human Sam gets hit, it will be crippling. The Kratik got in range of Sam and threw a punch. Sam rolled with it, putting his back into the body of the Kratik, and rolled him onto the floor. Sam threw a finishing blow to the Kratik's head, but stopped at the last moment. Sam held out his hand and helped the creature back up. The 2 patted each other. The silver goadur looked at its comrade. "The humans possess knowledge even we have not perfected. How is this possible?" The black-armored one slow blinked a negative response. "I do not know. They seem to incorporate higher mathematics into their fighting styles. What do you think we should do?" "It is obvious, isn't it?" "Yes. Tell High Command." "Agreed." On the other side of Twain, Cammy, the once rogue mother and now dutiful nurse, was working in the EIR hospital. She entered into a room containing a Kaworu female and 3 younglings. She approached the apparent mother and inquired, "What is the situation?" The mother touched her young ones on their heads, each in turn. "They hatched with a cough. They are smaller than their siblings. I worry. They are sick." Cammy knelt down and looked at the 3 chicks. Her eyes flicked through the spectrums, scanning them. "Comparing scans to your species profiles now." Cammy stood back up and looked at the mother. "Do you mind if I scan you for comparison?" The Kaworu mother clicked her curved beak in confirmation. Cammy scanned her. She then reached up gently with her holographic hand. Inside the hologram, hidden out of sight from the Kaworu, was a spindle arm, spooled out to take samples from the subjects. Cammy ran skin samples from each through a small reactor in her center controller. Cammy waited for a moment, smiling at the Kaworu. Then the samples were done. Cammy looked at the mother. "These 3, do you remember where they were in the sequence of your laying?" The mother nodded. "Yes, they are my 3 last laid." Cammy nodded. "You are low in methionine. You most likely used it up in the laying. They are deficient as well. There are numerous foods you can eat to restore it. I am sending you a list to your data purse now. Improve your diet and they should be restored to health." The mother bobbed her head. "Thank you. You really think we will be well?" Cammy bobbed her head in response. "Yes, improve your diets and I predict they should recover. If not, please return and we will continue diagnostics." The mother seemed agitated. Cammy picked up on skin prickles under the brown hair and fidgeting in her tiny hands. "What is wrong?" The mother looked up at her. "My husband didn't make it from Kaworu. I do not have much. I fix components from home for the factory, but I do not get enough clams to feed us anymore." Cammy frowned. "1 second. The AI reached over into Orbit's digital space and watched the stock market. Cammy put in a buy order on neutronium. Once the trade went through, she moved her massive ship body on the edge of the sector a fraction inward toward Twain. Alerts rang out through the station. Infinigan manned turrets. Grazers started load sequences. Craddock ran ship tests preparing for the Rogue Mother's potential attack. Neutronium prices went up significantly as the bays started producing more missiles. Cammy sold her share at 3 times her buy price. Cammy turned to the mother and smiled. "I have deposited funds into your account. That should be a good start. There is also a need for nursery mothers in the Grazer barrio. Your skills would be much needed and well paid for there. And also the ad says child nursery care is free to employees. I suggest you apply there." The Kaworu mother looked at her purse display and looked back up at the AI. "You are a goddess. Thank you, Mother Cammy." She hopped down onto her tiny gray legs, looking up at the hologram. The 3 little Kaworu hopped down beside their mother. She bobbed her head again. "Thank you, Cammy. I do not understand why the humans fear you. You are one of the best things they have ever created." Cammy watched as the mother and her chicks walked down the hall. She added the DNA information accumulated into her databanks, stored for future potentialities. Orbit was performing his numerous familiar tasks. The freighters continued their docking sequences. The ore filtered through the conveyor systems, going to the storehouse to be converted via the box spiders into all the numerous needed alloys. The alloys, whether they be dust, liquid, or slabs, were conveyed over to the departing freighter long haulers. The portion designated the station cut was conveyed to a separate storehouse to be utilized by Orbit's box spider chain gangs. One of the 8 sections' outer shell was completed. Wiring and scaffolding were already being installed on the newly hung outer wall. Several species had already bought build rights, with plans for habitats, more farms, and a specialized Craddock docking berth for larger ships. Orbit, in his duties, monitored Cammy continuously. He had missed the trade deal she had done, but after looking at the records he understood her movement. An hour later she moved back to her previous orbital course. Orbit increased monitoring of her, both physical bodies and her algorithms flowing through the digital space. As the sensors were tuned to pick up Cammy's movement better, Orbit noticed something. 3 small moving objects approached the station on a seemingly chaotic trajectory. Threat levels increased, and Orbit scanned the entities. Cameras on all spectrums peered at the approaching objects. Orbit halted the threat level rise upon seeing them. The three objects were not missiles, asteroids, or any other normal object that would be hurtling toward the station, but were in fact living creatures out in the void. Orbit sent alerts to Senators, Sam, Air, and the Preserver, while continuing observation. The creatures had a large mass in their centers, with wisps of matter circling them. Long strands of tissue trailed behind them. The three creatures looped around the station several times, and Orbit tested out their path. The creatures seemed to be following a newly developed magnetosphere generated by the inner cores and the conflux of the newly constructed portion of outer shell. Sam stood in the atrium watching with his spectrometer goggles. The Preserver, 4 Air, 2 Webbians in their tubes, and Asterion stood watching as well. Sam leaned over to the Preserver. "What are they?" The Preserver watched with his naturally capable eyes. "I have heard rumors of them. They are rare to say the least, and when sighted they are viewed as a good omen." Orbit appeared next to Sam. "I've been combing shipping records. There are several sightings listed in the logs of numerous species. Nothing is coming up for them being any kind of threat." Sam watched as they went around the outer ring of the station again. "So kind of like space albatross or something?" Orbit nodded. "Seems so." Asterion pointed. "Does it seem like they are getting closer?" Orbit scanned their trajectories. "Yes, they are closing in on the completed hull there." He pointed with his purple holographic hand. The three entities, now slightly glowing, descended onto the outer hull. "They have landed." Sam looked at Orbit. "Can you get camera feeds of them? I want to know if they're doing anything threatening." Orbit nodded. "Yes, sir. Repositioning box spiders and satellites now." The group gathered around Orbit as he brought up a rendering of the entities on the outer hull. The three creatures' outer shapes changed and altered as they hovered next to the hull. The tendrils drew into their cores and moved back and forth from the bodies to the hull of the station. The Preserver watched for a moment. "Are they depositing something there?" Orbit zoomed in on the point of contact. A small ridge was being developed with each pass of the tendrils. "Yes, they are putting something on the outside." Sam looked. "What is it? Is it damaging the shell?" Orbit shook his head and brought up an image of a bird. "I believe I have found a similar modeling of their behavior. I cannot be certain without further observation and testing of the material they have deposited." Sam looked at the bird. "You think they are nesting?" "Yes, sir. I believe they may be building a nest. They followed the magnetic lines of the station and purposefully chose that spot. Distance spectrography shows the ring they are making is composed of iron, magnesium, carbon, and other trace elements, none of which are a potential threat." Greenfeet, 4 obelisks, and a Fuimos got off the elevator and approached the group. Greenfeet walked up to Sam. "I heard there are star guides out there. This true?" Sam pointed at the hologram. "Those things!" Greenfeet blinked his eye stalks and looked at the creatures. "This is a good omen. The station has finally been blessed." The obelisks encircled Orbit and the hologram. One of them looked up at the taller members of the group. "This is a good sign. Trading will be prosperous." It looked back at its fellows. "We should buy all we can now before prices spike." One of the other obelisks slowly blinked at the speaker. "Agreed. Good sign. Casino will be full soon as well. Many will come. Hotel will be booked as well." The obelisks turned and looked at Sam in unison. They spoke as one. "We wish to purchase the space around the hotel for expansion. We will be sending you details, purchase specifications, and future impact modeling shortly." The 4 obelisks quickly walked back to the elevator. Sam looked around the group. What just happened? Greenfeet reached out, attempting to touch the hologram. "They are a sign of safety. They do not like turbulence. If they are here, they feel Twain is safe for them. If it is safe for them, many will feel it is safe for all." Sam looked around the group. "Orbit, how much chatter is there about them so far?" Orbit paused to scan the datanet. "It is spiking. Comm channels through the beacons are nearing capacity in text, voice, and imaging." Sam looked at the hologram of the space albatross angel things. Get a hold of the Scribbler law firm. Tell them to look over laws concerning protected species. And make something for these things. Run it to the Senate. The preserver bobbed a bit. I want samples. I need samples. Asterion looked at Sam. What are you thinking, Sam? Sam looked up at the tall tower. I'm thinking we're about to have a spike in tourism, and we need to protect our new golden goose. Curator had delivered on the roads. With the packs outfitted with scythes, it didn't take long to carve out paths through the jungle. After the paths were cut, Curator went over them with a fleet of biomechanical box spiders and Vatalian guard. The ensuing horde of beasts fed the villages, and special cooler buildings were built to house the surplus. Curator added in thorium power plants to the deal, providing light and electricity to every town. The roads were sealed, packed, and covered with a living biomass that consumed light and produced adverse proteins to inhibit any other life forms from growing over it. Shoes became mandatory for anyone traveling on them. Callie and Cookie were in the machine shop overlooking the 3 mechs. Spawned and Finnegan helped assemble them while Grape Juice and 2 other preservers applied the outer skin layer. Callie smiled. What kind of range do you think they will have? Cookie tapped on his console and came up with the figures. They can walk for approximately 3 million cycles, but their gravitational jumpers will have lift time of around an hour before having to recharge. Is that fully loaded out? Cookie focused an eye on her. Of course. I'm doing my calculations within mission operating parameters. We are wanting optimal outcomes. He focused back on his console. So inefficient. Callie crossed her arms. Did you say something? Cookie refocused on her, this time with all 3 eyes. I did. I was commenting on how inefficient human logic and speech is. Everything you say and transmit is skewed in 100 different ways, and most of those directions are flawed logic. Callie adjusted her spectacles. You're lucky I know you. See those soldiers down there? She pointed at the humans testing out their war rigs. If they overheard your generalization of humanity, they might take offense. She smiled at him. We may be illogical or vague, but if insulted, we will get right to the fucking point. Cookie watched her. Her pulse rose and pheromone levels in her immediate vicinity spiked. Again, your speech is flawed. Your nonverbal communication speaks truer than your conscious spoken words. You are quite angry. Callie took a deep breath, trying to calm the flush in her cheeks. Don't worry about it. Just focus on the mechs. I want them ready for tomorrow. Cookie turned back to the mechs in the machine bay. They will be ready, ma'am. Curator and 7 packs were assembled outside the following morning. Curator manipulated the largest of the mechs via her software. The mech was modeled after her newest form, with beam weapons mounted on the numerous tendrils wiggling on the mech's scalp. The mech had a large backpack-like compartment designed to safely house most of the Vatalian guard in flight. The other 2 mechs walked up the ramp and out of the mechanical bay, the giant airlock doors locking behind them. Grape Juice and Cookie operated the preserver-based mech, with human war rigs hanging on its back and sides. Callie operated the 3rd, a humanoid mech with large railguns on its shoulders and Scribbler Knights attached over its body. Curator knelt her giant doppelganger down in front of the Vatalians. Pink approached with her guard, stopping next to Curator herself. She flashed at the android. I have been struck stupid. I cannot think when I look at your giants. Pink looked at Curator. I never fully believed the things Stubborn said about you. I thought she was addled, or merely in awe. Now with these 3, I believe. Curator smiled and had her giant lower its hand to her. She climbed onto the palm. Did you wish to come? Pink flashed a no. Even with these, you are going into the realm of death. I stay here with my people. Any of my guards who return will be given princesses of their own. Old Mother has assured it. She has also asked for bones. We will bring her bones, most certainly. I have put a monitor in your house for you to watch our progress, as well as one in Old Mother's building, Curator said. Pink motioned to her pack. We will watch with great attention. I wish you success. May you reach the Tower of Fangs. Curator had the giant lift her into the air. She flashed down at the assembled guards. Everyone who is going, load up in the pack. We leave soon. Stubborn, now with a third worm nub growing on her back, crawled into the giant's backpack first, followed by Slayer and the rest of the packs. They filled the seats and the hanging hammocks, with air conditioning cooling and dehumidifying the air. Several stretched out, relaxing in the novelty of the room. Curator attached herself via tendrils to the giant's palm. She looked over at Callie in the skull of the other giant. Callie gave her a thumbs up. She turned her attention to the two preservers in the preserver mech. They focused on her and gave her a finger on each of their hands raised up. She smiled and gave thumbs back. Curator watched through her sensors, and all payloads and parties were stowed. She gave the lights for liftoff. The 3 mechs eased into levitation. The grav arrays proved functional, and the 3 mechs eased higher into the air, and then shot out across the mountain range in a V formation. Curator leading the way. The flight across the sea took 45 minutes. Curator led the 3 mechs over the shoreline, looking for a stable rock formation to set down on. After another 5 minutes, she found a cliff outcropping jutting into the roiling water. She sat down, and the other 2 followed suit, just as the flight time was nearing its end. Curator spoke over the comm. "Set up a perimeter. I will establish a beachhead here." The preserver mech cantered out toward the edge of the tall forest and pulled up several trees. It ran the trees through its chest mechanisms, chewing them up into biomass for the preservers to use. Human and Scribbler war rigs detached and began setting up motion sensors and established overlapping lines of fire. Callie aimed her 2 shoulder-mounted railguns into the woods. She replied over the channel, charged up and ready to unload. Curator gave a thumbs-up emoji over the channel while she lowered her mech's wrist toward the outcropping. A cavity opened up, and a network of biomechanical box spiders unfolded in an origami-designed fashion. The box spiders, upon hitting the ground, began chewing the rock into a flattened surface. Several dozen started a borehole, eventually hitting water. The spiders began lining the hole with a protective film and capped it. They took metals out of the rocks and seawater and concentrated them into usable alloys, which they used to construct a pump. Curator continued with them, building up a concentrator, separator, storage tanks, landing pad, and a biosafe bunkhouse, while the others maintained their vigilance. It was during the final stages of the bunkhouse construction when the forest's denizens reached them. Things on numerous legs walked, tumbled, spooled, and ran out of the tree line. Teeth, fangs, suckers, and claws were all splayed out as the creatures expected to encounter their prey. Callie unleashed her railgun projectiles. As the massive shots split the tree line, the other soldiers started firing. Some of the larger creatures took numerous hits to put down. Others erupted into a mist of spray and filth. After several minutes of firing, the tree line was leveled a kilometer further back. On the shoreline, blobs of teeth and slime crawled up the cliffs. Vatalians cut them apart with their scythes as they crested the rise. The preserver mech continuously sucked in the air, analyzing and categorizing the newly deceased life forms. Cookie flicked one after another into groupings to aid in the detection of logic sequences when he analyzed their DNA. Grape juice was busy dissolving the biomass and repurposing it into sheets of protective skin for the new construction. Curator kept her tendrils on alert, ready to pinpoint fire on anything that approached too close. Pink had hiked back with her clan down the road to Old Mother's city. The Old Mother and a dozen of her daughters, including Pink, sat watching the empty monitor, waiting for the promised video feed. After several hours of waiting, the screen lit up. Curator's hideous face was staring at them. "Hello, Vatalians," she flashed. Stubborn was standing behind her, looking out over the shore. Curator pointed at the tree line. "We survived the initial wave of creatures. The preservers are analyzing them already. The beachhead is stable, landing pad is stable, and comm tower is up, obviously." She pointed into the air, highlighting a shuttlecraft. "I have the 2 supply ships already running trips back and forth. If any of you wish to come and visit, you are welcome to. Just make arrangements at the outpost." Curator pointed at the circular storm edge on the horizon. "There is an increase in electromagnetic disruption from here on out. We will camp here tonight while I upgrade our Faraday ratings. We will attempt to start forging a road in the morning." Curator changed the video feed to a dozen different cameras. She was in the bottom corner one. "I will let you choose the feeds you want to watch tonight. Just touch what you want and it will get large. Curator then turned and walked toward the bunkhouse. Old Mother reached over to the monitor and touched a feed looking into the forest. The forest grew large on the screen, as did the far mountain illuminated by lightning flashes in the distance. I hope they destroy it. Kill the damn place. Pink turned her head, looking over the Tower of Fangs. I just hope they survive. Over the night, 3 large, bulky creatures had lumbered through the trap lines. Smaller rounds did little against their thick hides, and Callie had to use her mech shoulder cannons to obliterate them. As the sun rose, Curator finished up her modifications and packed up most of the box spiders. She stepped the giantess out of the camp, the head tendrils burning away numerous smaller, crawling creatures. She focused several of the beams on the ground ahead of her, melting the porous soil, allowing the box spiders easier access to firming materials. Knights and soldiers scouted the tree line, firing on anything that crawled out. Callie fired more bursts, felling a swath of trees in preparation for the building of the road. The preserver mech inched into the fallen trees, pulling them up and devouring them. A torrent of biofilm poured out from the mech's legs, coating the ground with a layer of living slime. The box spiders waded through the slime, applying it to the newly forged road. Inch by inch, the team cut their way toward the storm. Curator sent out flying drones to do aerial scans of the forward terrain. The ground was a patchwork of matted organic masses, moss, filaments, trees, roots, and all manners of moving and squirming life showed up on the scans as deep as she could manage to look. The result was the road had to be built more like a web, stretching out over the surface, holding up the main spine they walked on. Underneath them, the ground was alive, a massive compost pile of assorted violent decomposers. Cookie entered the comm. I isolated something interesting. Send it, Curator answered. She looked over the file with her inner eye. The crew continued advancing slowly, but her mind was spending a good chunk of processing power looking over what Cookie had found. Interesting. I like the implications. Agreed, Cookie replied. I can print out a small batch of tests here on board if you want, or I can head back to the mountain. Callie spoke up. We need you here, but what is it you two found? Cookie sent over a holographic rendering to their human leader. Callie looked at it. It was a winged creature. She recognized it as being from a flock of creatures Curator had obliviated earlier with her giant head tendrils. It's a monster bat. So what? Cookie highlighted the winged portion of the creature. Note how the creature's main body all look different. Only the wings are similar. Callie looked over the different holographic creatures, swiping through them. Yeah, what of it? Cookie zoomed the hologram in on the winged aspect and pulled up a DNA comparison. The wings are a parasite, similar in design to the Vitalian backworms. Callie looked at it again. What are they? Like butterflies and theirs are caterpillars? Cookie shook his head. I do not understand those references, but they are 2 separate design species that may be interchangeable with our Vitalian friends. Store it for when we need it. We can test it under better conditions when we get back to the mountain. We need everyone focused on the task at hand. Curator chimed in. Cookie bobbed on screen. Understood. The crews continued onward, forging the road into the storm. 7 large monolithic creatures rose from the peat as they crossed over a river of slime. Callie stood on the foremost safe part of the road and fired into the building-sized monsters. They shattered and exploded meat across the forest canopy. Numerous arboreal creatures climbed the trees and started feasting on the debris. Callie spoke over the community frequency. This place is gross. How are you guys on the ground? Simon walked in his war rig, looking over his scribbler brothers. So far, so good. This comm tower the droid is building is drawing a lot of interest. We've been pounding creepy crawlies continuously. They're attracted to the radio waves. Curator toned in. I'm having the box spiders run a secondary power line down the road, and I'm going to install turrets on it. The tower should last during the mission, but I can't fathom they will last much longer after that. The preserver mech began coating the tower in a biological skin and linking it to the power lattice. Grape juice touched her communicator button. How much farther is it? This is the 3rd day and I'm getting worn out. Curator stood her giantess fully upright and took a laser distance measurement, pinging it off the mountain. If we keep going, I think we can make it by middle of the night. Grape Juice slumped in her seat and kept monitoring the biomass intake. She spoke again over the open frequency. Any idea what we're going to find over there? Curator focused her cameras on the tower. It was shaped like a serpent, with a torrent of water shooting out of its mouth. She could make out lights inside the mouth-like opening, and numerous red orbs falling down the waterfall to the river below. I do believe our hypothesis of it being the source of all the biodiversity on the planet is confirmed. Curator looked down at the river below the bridge the box spiders were building. Remnants of red embryonic sacs littered the rocks. Crustacean-like slugs were busy pulling them apart and eating them. The tower is some sort of organism factory, dropping these sacs into the river. Still no idea on who is up there running it. Let's keep going then, and hope it doesn't have any defenses, Grape Juice said. Callie looked up at the serpentine spire rising over the valley. Yeah, it would be a shame to blast it and not learn anything. Curator walked her mech off the bridge and onto the newly built landing. Even if you crater it, there will be clues. We will learn more than we knew either way. Simon and the scribblers cut apart a band of razor-fanged, hoofed creatures when Simon spoke back up. I vote for cratering it. This shit sucks. They completed the road, having it end at the base of the mountain. No defenses fired upon them. Simon, the Vatalians, and the scribblers stood on the cliff, shooting and cutting the rush of creatures rising out of the river. Stubborn flashed into her chest communicator. You think any of these beasts are like us in our packs? Most certainly, Cookie replied. Whatever is up there seems to recycle working sequences routinely through a diversification algorithm to mimic evolution. Callie sighed into the channel. Stubborn. Don't worry. If they are like you, then they will probably be rushing up that cliff to rip your throats out. It's you or them. Stubborn lowered her head and fired her custom pistols at a multi-legged creature that approached her. Understood. I will continue then. Curator was focusing her beams on cutting groves into the mountainside. The box spiders finished the groves, carving them into a stairwell. The giantess lowered the android onto a switchback platform. Curator stepped off and commanded the box spiders to continue the stairwell back up into the cliff. Callie, Simon, and 10 scribbler knights started ascending the waterfall's slick stairs. The box spiders stopped and piled on top of one another as they reached the top of the mountain. Curator walked up to them and commanded them to burrow into the structure. She read the material composition as their sensors scanned the incoming bits of boar material. It's a biometal, similar to what you came up with, Cookie. I'm sending you the data stream. Thank you, Curator, Cookie replied. Callie and the soldiers reached the top a few moments later. Curator had just finished boring a hole into the interior of the structure. A dull red glow illuminated the hole from inside. Curator stared into it and then walked in. Simon motioned for the knights to protect Callie, and then they too entered. Stubborn and 5 of her pack started up the stairs. Inside the building was quiet, except for a low hum of power surging through the walls. The team, led by Curator, walked cautiously and quietly. Curator stopped at a junction, looking off down the left hall. I found a clue. Callie and Simon turned the corner and looked. A totem had arms extended as it did maintenance on a conduit in the hall. The robot ignored their presence. Simon took pictures with his rig cameras. Why the hell are totems here? If they knew what this place was, why didn't they say anything? Curator walked up to the totem and put her hand on it. Tendrils wound out of her palm and into the metal of the robot. Attempting access. She reached into its code, circumventing its protective protocols. These are totem, but not like the totem we know. These have no cognition or thought. They're operating under orders. She scanned over its database. This one is dedicated to the electrical systems. We need more info. She scanned deeper. There, I got a map. Follow me. She started down the tunnel. The Vitalians caught up in time to join the Clouder Pack, and they all followed Curator deeper into the tower. They ascended the stairs, and Curator paused. 3 totem had arms raised. They were powering up weaponry in their manipulators. Curator broadcast orders. The totem lowered their arms and replied in English. Welcome, Administrator. Follow us. Curator smiled and followed them as they entered a large room. The group followed in behind, weapons still raised and ready. Simon looked around. The room reminded him of an enormous set of lungs. The roof and floor were ribbed, and numerous branching structures filled the space, each with a red embryonic sac growing at the end. Off to his left, one had reached maturity and dehisked, dropping to the floor. Water oozed out of the floor, channeling the sac down into a central vein, sliding the new life down and out of the room. Simon looked up at Callie. "Can we blow this place up yet?" Callie shook her head. "Curator's kicking ass. Let her do her thing." Simon rolled his eyes up in contempt. "She's going to get us all eaten." Callie shrugged. "She hasn't yet." Curator kept on through the spawning room and over to another set of stairs. She ascended into the head of the tower. Everyone continued following her. They entered into a control room with windows looking out over the valley and into the storm. Stubborn pointed. "There's our road. Look, you can see our landing there on the horizon." Simon stepped up beside the young Vitalian. "What do you think, Princess? Should we blow this place up?" She looked at him, eyeing his face with her predator gaze. "You're the human." He nodded and turned to Curator. "What you getting, android?" Curator gave him a side glance and ran her hands over the center console. "I'm getting data, eons and eons of data. Cookie, you're going to outclass your father with all of this. Females are going to be coming from all over to get a chance at this." Callie stepped up beside her. "What are they doing here? Why didn't they mention that they knew what the hell this place is?" Curator scanned the operating files. "The totems didn't make this place. They were made for this place. This planet is just as we thought. Some sort of algorithmic experiment, a sort of genoforge. It has been manipulating the biome on this planet for longer than Earth has existed. The storm seems to be a power source and also a means of accumulating water and minerals, continuously fueling the creation of new species." Stubborn touched a totem hovering nearby. "So these things made the old mother?" Curator thought for a split second. "Yes and no. They merely operate this place, no more intelligent than the worms in your back. They repair and keep this place running. The true makers only left fingerprints in the data, no real clues as to who they are." Callie looked out the window. "Can you turn it off without destroying it?" Curator nodded. "Easily, is that what you want?" Callie turned and looked at her. "It's not my choice. Ask the old mother." Curator nodded. "Asking now.